So let's talk about the playoffs and the NFC East posted right here because it gets very detailed very quickly. There's 3 total teams that have playoff scenarios. It's the 49ers, the Cowboys, and the Eagles. If you ask me, I think the 49ers have the kind of the simple one. We'll jump into that here in a little bit. But as you can see, the Eagles, they got a long list. But really, all I look at when I look at these playoff scenarios, don't get too frightened by it, is I'm just looking at 1 through 4, right? Because, 5 through 10 just kind of requires the Eagles to have a tie. But 1 through 4 are all wins. So, right, if the Eagles win, for example, if we take a look at that first one, Eagles win, and the Seahawks lose, boom, they're in the playoffs there. And, you look at the rest of the matchups there, they require a win, right? So the Eagles got to bounce back. They got to win on Sunday Night Football. They got to beat the Cowboys. And in doing so, they would be sweeping the Cowboys. And then quickly, before we take a look at the Cowboys, let's circle back around to the 49ers. This is their playoff scenarios here for the 49ers to make it into the playoffs, to clinch a playoff berth. They're taking on Seattle, who are 6-6. And so, a win or a loss, a win or a Green Bay loss, a win or a Vikings loss. And then, that last one is just ridiculous. I don't really pay attention to the ties when it comes to the playoff scenarios, but you look at that, that's what you're looking at. But then we jump over to the Dallas Cowboys, and they do have their first clinching scenario going here into Week 14. And before we jump into that, though, if the Cowboys win, technically, yes, they are the number 1 seed in the NFC East. Or sorry, they take the lead in the NFC East. That was poor wording on my part there. They're not taking the number 1 seed or anything like that. They would just be first in the NFC East because they would have the tiebreaker, right? So let me explain that a little bit here, and I'll actually post that right there because I got photos of that too. Is they would technically be 10-3, right? If the Cowboys win on Sunday night. And when you have a tiebreaker, the first game that you look at is the head-to-head matchups. Well, the Cowboys, if they win on Sunday night, it would be split. It would be 1-1. So the second thing that you look at that point would be their record within a division. Now, if the Cowboys win, their record goes up to 4-1, and then the Eagles go to 3-1. So technically, based on percentage, the Cowboys would have the better, division record within a division. So they would take a temporary lead in the NFC East. But it gets a little bit complicated in that because, say, for example, and I'm just, I'm tossing this out here. Say, for example, if the Cowboys and the Eagles end up with the same record at the end of the season, say if they both end up, 14-3 or 13-4, the Eagles would still ultimately have that tiebreaker because if you look at the Eagles schedule compared to the Cowboys schedule, after looking at the division record, you would be looking at the, I think it's the common opponent record, which the Eagles would have that. And then you would also factor into the record within the conference, which is the NFC. So to say that the Dallas Cowboys control their own destiny is unfortunately not necessarily the case, which kind of sucks, right? Because they're 9-3. Like, that's a good team if you're 9-3. But I think that's just to say how competitive the NFC is compared to the AFC. I mean, you could be a 9-3 team and only lose 3 times, and you're the 5th seed. I mean, that's insane, right? But if you've lost 3 times, or if you've lost like 5 or 6 times, you could be like the number 2, the number 3 seed in the AFC. So that's all to say that just kudos to this NFC. I mean, it's competitive, and it's going to be a heck of a playoff bracket when that time comes. But let's jump into some of the playoff clinching scenarios for the Dallas Cowboys. They get a little bit complicated. I tried to simplify them as much as I can, and keep in mind, I've taken out as much as I can the ties because the ties just are ridiculous. But just briefly, this is the official look of all of that, right? Like, okay, just soak that in for a moment. It's overwhelming. There's a lot of parentheses. There's a lot of stuff. Now let me show you what I did. So yes, life of a designer, a graphic designer. This is what I've done for you. So you clinch the playoff berth and there's 3 scenarios, right? So if the Vikings lose, the Packers lose, the Seahawks lose, the Buccaneers lose, and the Rams lose, and if the Lions beat the Bears, then, and if you win your game on Sunday Night Football, boom, you're in. The only game that I believe is subject to, I think it's the Packers and the Giants, which is Monday night. So we won't know officially. I mean, we'll have a pretty good idea Sunday night before the Cowboys kick off the ball. We'll have a pretty good idea of where they stand, of whether there's actually a chance. But that's scenario number 1. You look at scenario number 2, Cowboys win, Vikings lose, Packers lose, Seahawks lose, Buccaneers lose, and the Saints lose, and the Lions win. So that one on the right, that team is just changing, right? So it went from the Rams losing to the Saints losing. And then this one's probably the more simpler one here, parentheses, simpler. It's if the Cowboys win, and then the Vikings lose, the Packers lose, the Seahawks lose, the Buccaneers lose, and the Lions win their game. The Cowboys would officially stamp their ticket to the playoffs. And of course, there's little things in the parentheses if they don't tie or whatever. But that's me being as simple as possible for you to know what the Cowboys need to do. But of course, as everyone says always in my comments, all the Cowboys have to worry about is winning their games and taking care of business. And if they win out, they obviously give their best chance to have that number one seed or the NFC East.